Our goal tonight is to provide you with an overview of classical education in general and the classical curriculum of our school in particular. Won't be able to address all questions or concerns in my initial remarks, so we'll have a fair amount of time for questions and comments. And we're also happy, even after our formal time is done, we'll stick around until they kick us out anyway, and answer any questions that you have one-on-one. And so let me begin tonight with introducing the men and women. There we go. The men and women who are bringing classical education to Toledo, Ohio. There's a number of them tonight. The Northwest Ohio Classical Academy is a charter school, which means that it's a public school that's independently governed. And the Board of Trustees are the people who govern the school, who keep it, in my view, faithful and true to its mission of bringing classical education to Toledo, Ohio. And the men and women on this board are passionate about classical education. They're mothers and fathers, grandmothers and grandfathers, businessmen, teachers, doctors, and I'm saving the best for last, lawyers, all of whom are spending their time, their talent, and their money to bring classical education to Toledo, Ohio. And our founding principal, Mr. Schwank, should be with us, should be joining us shortly. He's coming from his work. And our founding principal, Mr. Schwank, is coming to Northwest Ohio Classical Academy with literally decades of experience in public education as a teacher, as a junior administrator, and then as a senior administrator in both traditional public schools and in charter schools in California and in Ohio. He's passionate about classical education, in part because of his experiences in a non-classical education context. And he's also an inspiring leader for our faculty. And this really came home to me when we were interviewing up at Hillsdale College maybe 3 weeks ago, interviewing students for our founding faculty. And seeing Mr. Schwank, you could see him thinking about how would this candidate fit in an overall mix of faculty? Like, what would this particular candidate bring to that mix? And in particular, what I saw was Mr. Schwank displaying a passion for young people. And in fact, one of his key questions would be to the candidates, do you, I don't know if it says he would say love, or do you want to have the best education for these young people? He wanted to see that each of the individual teachers cared about our students and our future students. So this evening I'll provide a little bit of background about the Academy. Then I'll explain why classical education is the best form of education for your children or your grandchildren. And then we'll open the floor for questions. And I'll say this twice tonight. We have enrollment forms over there, so feel free to sign your children up if we persuade you tonight. So let me share with you a little bit about our academy. So our mission in Northwest Ohio Classical Academy is to partner with you as parents to raise your children to be thoughtful citizens and virtuous leaders. And we do that through a rigorous, content-rich curriculum. And so this is our K through 8 curriculum. It's one of the facets. If you want, I'll give it to you. You can just pass it around, flip through it, and the heft alone tells you how rigorous and content-rich it is. And this is one of the benefits of partnering with Hillsdale College, is that Hillsdale, with its own expertise and in partnership with other experts, put together this curriculum for the Barney Charter School Initiative, which I'll say a few things about in a little bit. We are completing the purchase of our school facility, and it's going to be at 5025 Glendale Avenue in Toledo, which is on Glendale just east of where Reynolds is at. It's the former Calvary Baptist Church facility, and it has all the amenities of a school, including a gym, a kitchen. It's got 14 classrooms to accommodate our growth. As we said, we're starting off K through 8, but we plan on adding a grade every year up until K through 12. And we also want to add more than one class per grade eventually, and there's land to build on that site as well. I think there's like 12 acres altogether. As I mentioned, we're an affiliate of the Barney Charter School Initiative. The Barney Charter School Initiative is out of Hillsdale College. How many people have heard of Hillsdale College from Hillsdale, Michigan? Okay, so most people have heard of it. If you've heard of it, you probably know about its reputation for academic excellence. And I'll give you just one anecdote on that point. So this year, I'm spending a sabbatical at Princeton, and Princeton's a great university, and I'll have conversations with the young people there. And one of the things that once they get to know how old I am and I have a child in college, they'll say, where's your son going to college? And I'll say, Hillsdale. And I would say about half of the time, the students have said to me that they had also applied to Hillsdale. And obviously the ones at Princeton chose to come to Princeton, but they said they had a number of friends who went to Hillsdale. So it showed me that its reputation is that powerful. The Barney Charter School Initiative is Hillsdale's attempt to bring that same excellent liberal arts approach at the college level down to the K through 8 level. And there are 21 Barney charter schools in the U.S. this year, and there are going to be 2 more next year, including our school, Northwest Ohio. And Hillsdale is helping us in a variety of ways. So first is the curriculum, which is being passed around. And this curriculum was formed through the expertise of Hillsdale and other experts in classical education. Hillsdale also provides us with access to a network of potential administrators and faculty. Like I said, we interviewed potential faculty up at Hillsdale a couple of weeks ago. Hillsdale gives us advice, both practical and theoretical. I mean, you cannot believe all the questions that are legitimately raised when it comes to starting a school, especially one that's not a standard or traditional public school, because those are cookie cutter. Their answers are there. This is something new, at least in the state of Ohio. And Hillsdale provides training for our administrator. So our administrator, Mr. Schwank, has received advice on what books he should be reading, and he's going to be receiving training along with our founding faculty for at least 2 weeks prior to the beginning of the school. And then they'll be receiving training throughout the school year as well. And to give you a taste of what Hillsdale brings to our partnership, I'm going to play a short video that they've prepared.
In education today, there are a number of directions that schools have taken over the last century, really the 20th century.
Across the country, in almost every school you see, it's college and career readiness. So the prevailing view of what a human being is some kind of economic producer.
Education has moved in about the same way everything public has moved.
Frankly, in a K-6 arena, everything you do is micromanaged by a district, a state legislature, a Department of Education.
Now we live in an evolutionary age where you think that everything is changing and that keeping up with the change, or better, helping to make the change, is the great goal.
We see the effects of that today, where schools don't have the same kind of focus on content, and so they have a deficit of cultural literacy, they have a deficit of knowledge about the human world and the natural world.
We have students who come in here and they say, I have to turn in homework? I have homework? What's a zero?
You know, at the college level, we had students entering with a standard high school diploma who still couldn't multiply and divide. If it wasn't a 5-paragraph essay, and even that was a challenge. So the skills that these students were graduating with after 13 years of public education were pretty mediocre.
I think there's a prevailing sense that students are graduating either morally lost or just adrift in general, or unclear on what life is for.
The founders knew that an educated citizenry was necessary to the health of the republic. So the impacts of this can be seen from the individual lives all the way out to our nation today.
Once I'd really started doing my research on classical ed, I kind of realized that this was the missing piece. This is what they weren't getting. And this is what raises good, strong college students and eventually good, strong adults.
Barney Charter School Initiative is an outreach of Hillsdale College, and it's an excellent way to reintroduce sound learning, classical liberal arts-based education that was common, even ubiquitous in this country.
Charles, let's go make it happen. Good morning, Kiara. Good morning, Douglas. Looking sharp. Good morning, Isaiah. Good morning, beautiful. Best handshake in the school. Jemiah.
We serve as the architect of the academic program. We're an advisor to these schools so that they can continue for many years to serve the families and the communities and offer this kind of excellent education.
Here at Hillsdale, we don't take any money from the government, so we don't take any money from these schools, but we offer them help. We've contrived a curriculum for and with them, and we help train their teachers, and we try to be of assistance any way we can.
I will tell you the school board about fell out of their chairs when I described the relationship with Hillsdale College in our charter school interview.
They have a whole team of people who work to refine the curriculum, improve what kids are being exposed to, and they make some great recommendations that really help shape our program to be successful.
I think last summer there were 400 or so teachers here for a week to 10 days, working with our faculty and with each other.
The ability to pick up the phone and call any member of the Barney Charter School Initiative at any time and say, we have a problem and I don't know how to fix it, give me some guidance, and it's there.
They send a whole team of teachers to starting schools, give a rundown on the curriculum, on classroom management policies, on just the general tenor and culture that the school should be seeking.
They came down and spent 2 weeks, 80 hours with our teachers, training them on how to do our curriculum, and didn't ask for anything in return. It's a pretty amazing relationship, I would say.
In the classroom, where the mission is actually being fulfilled, it's an interaction between teacher and student and curriculum.
We're much more focused on the individual student and making them a well-rounded human being. It's not just about their ability to pass a reading test or a math test, or to just be able to read well, which in many schools is all that matters.
We teach young people to understand what a human being is through the fabric of the curriculum itself and the study of great figures in history, both those that exemplify virtue and those that demonstrate vice.
It's their ability to understand the world around them, to understand the people around them, to be able to hold a conversation with an adult.
I mean, it's so much more exciting when you can tell these kids, we're going to learn this because it's hard, because it's going to teach you to think in a way you've never thought before. And you are going to grow as a human being because of it. So being able to do that and know why it's being done makes teaching in a classical school just a fantastic experience.
What I love most of all is seeing my girls loving learning, enjoying what they're learning, coming home and talking about what they're learning.
My son Jaden, the kindergartner, he grabbed a program and began to do phonograms on the bulletin at church. And for him to even be thinking about that, aside from doing his homework, I mean, that really, really blew my mind for a kindergartner to be so interested in it like that.
It's funny because all of my children, after they came here from the public school, they said, we want to go back to the public school. And I said, why? What did you like better about it? Because this is important to me. They didn't make us do anything. So right off,
Not what we said.
right off the bat, I was really, well, that seals it.
To see my daughter come home and just pick up books and just lay on the sofa, no TV, she just wants to read.
They're reciting poems for fun with their friends. I mean, it's been really great to see that kind of change and growth in them since they've been at this school.
I think that's part of being in a classical school, is just being in an entire society of people that love learning.
I like this school because you kids get an education and like you need to learn things so you can be smart when you grow up and you won't have trouble with hard stuff.
Is there anything else you want to tell all those people out there about Savannah Classical Academy?
It's amazing.
You're amazing. Good job.
I am finally in the world of education that I should be in. And I wish that there were more schools that were doing this.
Many hundreds of people, I think maybe even thousands of people, are essential to the work of the Barney Project. And we can't do it without that.
Learn the truth, do the good, love.
As a parent, I became involved in starting a school like this because I wanted something for my own children. Now seeing the impact we've had, I think this is the type of program we need throughout our state and through our nation.
The impact of the schools on the community is palpable. The districts take notice. Policymakers take note. And what that means for a local community can be extended into what that means for the nation.
The Barney Project is growing. And of course it takes enormous outside support. And we appeal for more.
Everyone has a stake in this.
So this can get huge. It can grow everywhere.
It's a sign of hope for me because there is a desire and a recognition that education is vital, that we need to do something to improve it, we need to do something to restore it, and thousands of children attending excellent schools, having their character shaped, has exciting prospects for this country.
So I'm not sure what you thought of the video or what you thought about classical education before you came to tonight, but the thing that strikes me most about that video is that classical education, even though it's rigorous, even though it's challenging, even though it's countercultural in a lot of ways, when you look at the students and the faculty of those schools, they were a joyful community, right? That they were doing it not out of drudgery or because they had to, but they were engaged because they had love of the good, the beautiful, and the true. So you've probably heard a little bit about classical education, and let me explain how it will help your child reach his or her full potential. So think about the stated goals of all or nearly all public and private schools in Ohio, or in the US actually, in general. And it's the Common Core, which is the curriculum that controversially was adopted by most states a few years ago. And when you look at the Common Core's goals, this is just a small smidgen of that larger. Here's the motto: preparing America's students for college and career. Now, college and career are good and valuable goals. I want all of my children to go to college, and I want all of my children to have a fulfilling and fruitful career if that's their vocation. But those aren't the whole of my children or the whole of your children, and therefore they can't be the whole of education. Classical education sees your children as more than economic actors, as more than people looking for jobs. It sees them as human beings who are going to fall in love, get married, raise families, worship God, serve their country, cultivate friendships, and much more. And our academy sees your children as on the road to becoming free and happy adults. And that's a noble purpose. Through our content-rich curriculum and traditional classroom that will provide your children and grandchildren with the knowledge, with the skills, and the character to flourish as free and happy adults. What I'm going to do now is spend a little bit of time on each of those three characteristics of our curriculum. So first, our curriculum is going to provide your children with the knowledge necessary to flourish as free and happy adults through our liberal arts education that is an education in the fullest sense of the term, because it helps your children have the knowledge to be free and happy. And because of time constraints, I'll just give you the smallest sampling of what your children will learn at Northwest Ohio Classical Academy. So your students will learn historical events, characters, stories, fables, scientific proofs, mathematical facts. For example, in 8th grade, your students will read the entire U.S. Constitution, which actually isn't very long, although you'll see that most students actually don't read it. They'll learn about James Madison, they'll learn about the Constitution's author, and they'll learn about topics like separation of powers, or the rule of law, or the founder's views of human nature. So what did James Madison think human beings were? His view was that human beings were sometimes good, sometimes bad, and most of us are a mix of both. And that they built that view of human nature into the Constitution. And so in 8th grade, your children will read the Constitution, have those kind of conversations. I teach law school, and whenever I teach constitutional law, which typically classes are around 95, I always ask before we start, have you read the Constitution? And every year it's a handful, 6 students, 7 students. I guess maybe I've gotten jaded, so it's not surprising to me anymore, but it's still sad, right? But our students in 8th grade will have read the entire Constitution. It's not the only time they'll approach it, of course, but it'll be the time where they'll read it for the first time fully. Your students will read whole literary works in great depth and learn them how to apply to their life, to their conversations, to their friendships. For example, your students will read Romeo and Juliet in 7th grade. If you were like me, you read Romeo and Juliet, if you read it at all, in high school, right? That was the first time that I read it. And here's the story I was told. Romeo and Juliet was about 2 people who were meant to be in love, who because of parents or society or culture were prevented from consummating that beautiful love. That's actually not what Shakespeare was writing about, and your students will learn the real story of what Shakespeare was trying to say, which was, it was a cautionary tale of young lovers who didn't listen to their parents, who had their children's best interest for them. Or Robert Louis Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde. So if you're like me, I never read that in college or high school. It's actually something I had to read on my own. And Robert Louis Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde, of course, is a story about a man who, through medicine and chemistry, is able to separate his good self from his bad self. Here's the Common Core's lesson plan for that. The Common Core says that the students don't read the entire book, they read a selection of it, And then the teacher suggested to play a YouTube clip from Saturday Night Live. Remember the Phil Hartman character of Frankenstein, right? And then and the conversation was about monsters. That's what Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde's about, is about monsters. What your children will learn is what Robert Louis Stevenson was actually trying to say, which is, same thing as James Madison, that all of us, inside of us, have some good and some evil, and that what Dr. Jekyll made the mistake is that he thought that he could somehow separate those, and he eventually lost control of the evil side of his nature. And so it's actually a cautionary tale about the mixture of human nature. Our curriculum has a robust Latin program beginning in grade 3 with Latin and Greek roots. And you may say, well, why does it matter about Latin and Greek roots? Well, I'll just give you one anecdote that captures, I think, the value of students learning that. So when our daughter Lucy was in 4th grade, she came up to me and asked, Dad, how do you spell astronaut? Now, if you were going to spell it like it sounds, it would be A-S-T-R-O-N-A-U-G-H-T. But that'd be wrong, right? And before I answered what the answer was, and the answer I was actually going to give was look in the dictionary, because that's my answer all the time. But before I even said that, she said, never mind. She had figured it out because she had had the Latin and Greek roots for astronaut. So the Greek and Latin root is astro, or astra, star, and then nauta, N-A-U-T-A, sailor. And so she knew it was N-A-U-T as opposed to T-H-T. And beginning in kindergarten, our students use the Singapore math program. And now you've all heard of the country of Singapore, right? It's one of the city-states. And do you know where Singapore ranks every year consistently for as long as they've been doing the test on math in the worldwide rankings? They rank #1 every year. And so our kids are using that #1 math program. All right, come on. There we go. Okay, second, classical education provides your children with the skills necessary to flourish as free and happy adults. These are skills that help your children in the economic sphere, no doubt, but in all facets of life. And our program will provide our students with the opportunity to develop these skills, including effective reading, research, writing, and oral presentation and oral expression. So one of the things that I have to do is supervise students writing papers. And our students have to write a number of papers between, I think it's 12 and 14 pages long. And I actually think it's too short, but whatever. But I always ask my students, how many of you have written a 10-page paper before coming to me? And this is after high school and college, right? And a significant minority, not a majority, but a significant minority have never written a 10-page paper. Our students will be writing more than 10-page papers and more than just once. Or how many of you had this experience? You meet a new young person today and you extend your hand, you look them in the eye to shake their hand, and they look down. Or they kind of fumble with the handshake, or the handshake is like the limp, dead fish handshake. Our students, because of the interaction in the classroom, where they're going to be expected to treat the adult in the classroom respectfully and for themselves to act like a respectful adult, will gain the self-confidence to be able to extend their hand with other adults. And they'll learn that skill that numerous Americans, and at least in my experience, don't have. Third, there we go. Third, classical education provides character formation, which is necessary to flourish as citizens and leaders. A good character is necessary for economic success and for success in life. A person who lacks a good work ethic is going to be a terrible employee. But people, to be full human beings, need more than just a good work ethic. And our curriculum and our teachers will be models for your children and grandchildren for the virtues that we want in our children. And so on the board is a painting of Horatius at the bridge. And Horatius at the bridge was a Roman. And let me give you an anecdote about that. So I love history. And at supper table, one of the things I typically ask will be, what did you learn in history class? And I remember our son, Alex, who had the disposition where I thought he would like history. Every time I would ask him the question, he would say something like, oh, nothing, or nothing really. Really disheartening to me because I wanted him to have a passion about history. And we switched over to a classical education. And one of the books that we were using for that year in 5th grade was The Great Men of Rome. It's from Memoria Press. And The Great Men of Rome has this story about Horatius at the bridge. And when I asked Alex that night at supper, what did you learn? He didn't have a problem telling me about Horatius at the bridge and the courage that he exemplified and how it had visibly inspired him as a young man. So history went from being dull and dry and boring, not even worth talking about, to something that was inspiring to him. As a concrete way to see how classical education is different than the education in a traditional classroom, let me play a short video, because one of the distinguishing characteristics of classical education is the way in which the classroom operates. And so if you are like most Americans who have parents in traditional schools, public and private today, you hear phrases like one-to-one laptops or one-to-one iPads or Chromebooks, right? And in fact, schools advertise that as one of their selling points. And that's not our approach. Our approach to technology is as a tool, a modest tool, to help children where necessary. Technology does not dominate our classroom.
So why pencil and paper? There's such a push right now for more and more technology in the classroom. It really becomes a distraction, right? You have your phone out. And what's on your phone? Well, you could be looking something up and doing notes, but there's also Facebook, there's also Twitter, there's also Snapchat, there's other things that in a school's life can really become distractions, and for students can become distractions. So getting that out of the classroom is a really important thing.
We live in a world that is full of distractions. We take away all of those distractions in order to help students have the freedom to learn at their best.
The act of listening to the teacher teaching, seeing it up on the board, thinking about it and putting it down on paper with a pencil, there's a lot stronger connection between the spoken word and then the written word. And so students retain a lot more when they have that kind of multi-sensory approach to learning. So they hear it, they see it, and they write it. But students are able to engage with the material a lot more. They're actively learning. They're not passively watching something from a screen.
Just having on pencil and paper and just like being able to work with your own thoughts and not the computer's thoughts is really important.
I think especially with our no cell phone policy, the conversations that I'm able to have with my fellow classmates it's amazing. The things we can discuss without our phones.
One of the key parts of our culture is in class, it's students taking notes and having a conversation, and that's it. There's nothing extraneous, which means it's focused, it's direct, it's always that live conversation with teachers and students.
Here in particular, I have found my place because I'm able to teach things that really matter.
Golden View offers students an education that I believe is unparalleled to any other school.
Just come to a class, come in and sit down, come to a Riggs lesson, come to a literature lesson, and hear what we're doing and what we're saying and what the students are saying. And you'll see that there are great things happening in the classroom.
So Golden View is one of the Barney charter schools out in Colorado. Okay, so when you think about a classroom, let's say that you were to go to your child's classroom in a traditional public or private school, and think about how it compares to what your children will experience in Northwest Ohio Classical Academy. In the classical classroom, the teacher leads the students because the teacher is the master of the subject. The teacher is also a role model of adulthood for the students. And the students and the teachers interact with each other in a joint and orderly, but also joyful pursuit of knowledge. By contrast, in traditional public and private education, the teacher is not the leader. The students do not interact with the teacher or with each other. They work by themselves. They often teach themselves. Have you guys heard of the concept of the flipped classroom? My son, about 5 years ago, was one of the fads at the time. He was in a traditional private school, and he came home, and basically I had to teach him math because the teacher believed in the flipped classroom concept. So the students were teaching themselves, and they often use a heavy dose of technology. So which of the classrooms is the classical one? Somebody tell me. What's that? There you go. Okay, yeah, so the teacher's leading, the students are orderly, but they're happy, and they're interacting with the teacher. And these schools, a traditional private school and a traditional public school, have different degrees of variation away from that. Okay, so you might say, well, those are some pretty slick videos, but anybody can put those together. Or, I'd like to learn my kid to learn a little bit of Latin, but how do I know this classical education thing actually works? Classical education has been a growing phenomenon in the U.S. for about 40 years now. And that's enough time for there to be evidence of the effectiveness or lack of effectiveness of classical education. Let me just give you a sampling of the empirical evidence that supports the proposition that classical education helps kids achieve better educational outcomes. Schools that have adopted classical education have seen consistently high academic achievement. For example, Hillsdale Academy, which has a predominantly rural and sizable poor population of students, has never scored below the 97th percentile on the Iowa Test of Basic Skills. Or Highlands Latin School, which was one of the first classical schools in the U.S. in Louisville, Kentucky, its students consistently score at the top 1% of the Iowa test of basic skills. And at the high school level, which we don't have yet, but we'll have next year, or the following year, these outstanding results continue. For example, the Lyceum, which is a private classical school in Cleveland, their high school students average in the top 13% of SAT takers every year. There aren't a lot of empirical studies, and I think the reason why there aren't a lot of empirical studies of classical education is just because most education schools aren't interested in it. I had an experience one time where I sat on a dissertation committee where the dissertation was about homeschooling, and I think it'd be fair to say that the people on the dissertation committee from the education school were not interested in homeschooling. And so I think it's just that there's not an interest in classical education. And here's Mr. Schwenk, our founding principal, and he'll be on the hot seat here in a moment, so give him a break. There are many studies, but one that I found especially impressive was written by a gentleman who was in seminary for the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. The Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, my understanding is, has the second largest network of private schools in the U.S. And what this person did for his master's thesis was he tested, he compared Lutheran schools K through 8 that used the standard public private school model compared to Lutheran schools K through 8 that used the classical model. And here's what he found. He said during the kindergarten year, the scores for the standard Lutheran schools were actually higher than the classical Lutheran schools. He found that by the 4th grade, the classical Lutheran school scores began to exceed the standard Lutheran school scores. And then finally, by the 8th grade, these are K through 8 schools, the classical Lutheran school scores exceeded the standard scores by 18%. Same demographics, same religious commitments, same theological commitments. The only thing that was different was the curriculum and the pedagogy, and that led to about 20% different outcomes. A 2015 study of the ACT scores of students who graduated from the Association of Classical Christian Schools, which is a group that has a whole bunch of classical schools around the country, found that the national average on the ACT for those students was 26. The national average for the rest of America was 21. So what I've done just very briefly tonight is I've argued that classical education is the best education for your children and grandchildren because it provides them with the knowledge, the skills, and the character to flourish as free and happy adults.